Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's not our ordinary Wednesday night. It's Tuesday at 9 p.m., but we are here, Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, together with Rabbi Philip Moskowitz and Rabbi Josh Broide, and we're here to take you
behind the Bima.
On cue again, as usual, Rabbi Broide. Really perfectly timed. Thank God for you. Gentlemen, how are you? How was your week so far? We're earlier in the week than we normally are. It's only Tuesday night.
My week is phenomenal. We had a fantastic, really inspiring Simchas Torah at BRS. And now the Yom Tov season of 5781 Rabbi Goldberg is...
It's in the books.
It's in the books.
It is absolutely in the books. And we couldn't be happier, prouder, more relieved than ever that this year went off without a hitch. And there's a lot more to talk about. And hopefully we'll be able to get to that tonight, how this Simchas Torah ranked against others, especially all things considered. But we want to begin by thanking our very generous sponsor tonight. He's sponsored several times. He's a very loyal listener and fan, and that is Donnie Oppenheimer of the Oppenheimer Law Firm, who takes care of any of your legal needs. We have some swag tonight. I'm sure he'll be happy to provide it for you too. You can utilize the services, be in touch with him at oplawfirm.com. Donnie, thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your sponsorship. We really appreciate it tonight and always. We've got a very special guest coming on tonight. Yeah. Gentlemen, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz, I think more than ever. Rabbi Broide's got the shirt. Donnie's already commenting he's loving the shirt. Rabbi Broide, we've got the shirt, but my tie didn't go with the shirt, so I didn't.
I will say I've been wearing the shirt all day. The packaging for the swag was just as nice as the swag, by the way.
Yeah, it was.
Love it.
Donnie, thanks for sponsoring tonight and on several occasions. We have a great guest. We've had wonderful guests until now, and we're so grateful for all of them and all their time. Our guest tonight probably has the widest audience and the loudest microphone of anyone we've had yet, even bigger than Behind the Bima, and that's not easy for us to admit. But his podcast has just a few million more listeners than ours, but we're climbing the charts. We're well on our way, and that is, of course, Ben Shapiro. Ben is beloved by many, even to the degree of idol worship, particularly within the Orthodox community, and equally unbeloved by others who disagree sometimes with his opinion and his style. But one thing we can say is it's really extraordinary how he has climbed the ladder and built a media empire and is an enormous influence in the world who listen, and he shapes a lot of public opinion. So I want to take the time now, I don't want when he joins us to take the time to give a little bit of his background. So let me tell, for those who don't know, and maybe you're among the few who've never heard of Ben Shapiro. But
the truth is I hadn't heard of him until he came on Behind the Beam either. So,
nice try. Ben Shapiro is an American conservative political commentator, a media host, and he is an attorney. At the age of 17, he was the youngest nationally syndicated columnist in the United States, editor emeritus of the Daily Wire, which he founded, and he grew to an enormous subscription. He hosts the Ben Shapiro Show, which is listened daily by millions, not only in America, but around the world. I think it's syndicated on 200 stations, daily podcast and live radio show. He editor-at-large at Breitbart News from 2012 to 2016. He is the author of 11 books. Really what's, I think, really gripping him for tonight, we're going to go behind the Bima on this particular, is that he grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home and he lives a observant Orthodox Jewish upbringing. And maybe he made it big today, and we'll talk about some of his statistics of how many people listen, how many people follow him. But he was an ordinary young man. He graduated YU's high school in LA, where he grew up. He skipped 2 grades, and that way maybe a little unusual. Maybe both of you skipped grades. I did not.
I skipped grades the other direction.
All being held back, Rabbi Broide. So, Ben Shapiro skipped actually 2 grades, and he graduated high school at the age of 16. He then went to ULA, where he graduated summa cum laude, and then went to Harvard Law School, where he graduated cum laude in Harvard in 2007. He worked as a lawyer, and then he launched and began this media empire. And today, he is, I believe, the largest conservative media group. He personally, and the company that he founded, I think it has surpassed even Fox News and others. And so it's really shaping a lot of public opinion. And he does it all with a yarmulke, which is one of the things we're going to talk about. He does it representing Torah and observant Judaism, which faces a huge target for those who don't like, and gives him a huge microphone. And there are a lot of people who love what he stands for. But it's really amazing. He's born in 1984. I think he's 36 years old. 11 books, millions of followers. He's accomplished a lot at a young age. And as I said, love him or hate him, agree with him or disagree with him, you have to admire what he's accomplished, what he's achieved, his prodigious mind, and how he skipped those grades and he climbed that ladder, and he did so with a lot of ingenuity and a lot of creativity. And I think it's something really impressive. And we're excited that we're going to be able to bring him on tonight. And we certainly welcome your questions, your comments, many shared with us in advance, and others can submit now, whether on YouTube or on Facebook. We see all the comments aggregated, so feel free to share. If you're listening later to our podcast, don't forget to rate and review. Ben Shapiro doesn't need your help. We do. So rate and review Behind the Bima, and let the world know. We've had phenomenal guests who really inspired. And our goal, one of our guests earlier on, was Stretch, who taught at JM in the AM, the great host of JM in the AM, Nachum Siegel. And he taught us that you want to try to get your interviewee to share things that you're the only address that they would share it, things that you can't hear elsewhere. And that's going to be our goal tonight. And we've been privileged to have that goal. So when you rate and review, when you share about Behind the Bima, you help us get that message out even more broader. And one of our avid listeners points out that Ben Shapiro also has a hobby that I dropped at a young age. He plays the violin. He was a violinist. I think he once actually performed with Eitan Katz. I think the two of them performed together when he was a young man.
Maybe Rabbi Moskowitz and him can do like a special concert one night.
No, I'm the clarinet. He's the violin.
No, I'm saying you could whip out the clarinet that you haven't played in a couple of years, and
that's right.
I would love that.
You together.
The
question is, where do you go from here? I mean, you've got the biggest now. Like, who do you get next week?
Oh, we've got other people on.
It normally takes months and years to get to this point. You've done it overnight.
We've got other people who are lined up. We're getting to the point that people are actually contacting us. How do I get on Behind the Bima? I'd love to be interviewed. I'd love to tell my story, and many have extraordinary stories to tell, and we'd love to have them. So we've got some exciting things lined up for next week and 2 weeks from now. We are going to be broadcasting from a brand new venue in Boca, who will be sponsoring and featuring some of what is to come in Boca. We will be socially distanced, of course, being very respectful. Different backgrounds, different places, distanced from one another, but the same venue, and premiering a new venue in Boca Raton, which we'll be very, very excited to be able to share. So we've got some exciting things coming down the pike, exciting things that are coming very soon near us. What kind of excitement have you seen for tonight's episode? Have you seen stuff online, people talking?
Yes, Twitter is alive. I mean, every moment you get back on Twitter and you see another, dozen people just commenting on what they want to know, what they want to ask tonight.
Yeah, I'll tell you, when my father-in-law knew about it, that's how I knew we made it big. He told my wife, he said, "You're having Ben Shapiro on tonight. It's pretty impressive." And my wife had to Google him, but after she did, but the fact that my father-in-law knew about it, that to me was Dayenu. I've made it. I've arrived. I might be the favorite son-in-law right now.
So just to set the stage, and we'll repeat this when Ben joins us shortly, we are not talking politics tonight. If you want to know Ben's political positions or positions on areas of life policies, he has an extraordinary podcast you can listen to. He is a prolific author, and you could read his opinions. That is not the goal tonight. Tonight, the goal is, as we do with all of our guests, to go behind the Bima and to learn about him and see a side of him that we often or otherwise don't know. And I think many of us are curious about. And the goal is to learn. The goal is to understand. One of our themes, seek to understand before being understood. And the goal is to hopefully be inspired also, just to see a person who's attained that position and maybe learn something from it. Again, whether you agree or disagree.
And there's definitely a need out there, because we've all been flooded with more questions for this episode than any other episode. And it's not just because of his popularity or his fame. It's because people genuinely want to know these types of things. They don't oftentimes have a venue, a platform to speak to people who have millions and millions of followers. And I think there's a real hunger out there to go behind the Bima with people like Ben Shapiro. So I think it's definitely struck a chord.
Well, I'd actually add on to that. It's not only people who have so many followers. I think it's people who maybe are in ways anonymous. But the point is that when there are public personalities, whether it's a teacher, a rabbi, or some other public personality, people only see them frontally, their lectures and their comments. They don't really get to know them. And so this is really an opportunity to get to know. So
and the truth is,
we're going to welcome Ben. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, joined with Rabbi Philip Moskowitz and Rabbi Josh Broide. Ben, how are you?
Hey, doing well. How are you?
Doing fantastic. It's great to have you on. We really appreciate you giving us some time tonight. We know how valuable your time is, and it means a lot that you're sharing it with us. So, Ben, you were very public about your move from LA and some of the reasons why you moved from LA. I know your media company has moved to another place, but like other famous people before you, brought your talents to the South Florida area. What is it about South Florida? What excites you to be in the South Florida area?
Well, I mean, I think that it was a really easy move for us. We lived in the Valley in Los Angeles, and we were able to replicate the same resources or better in South Florida that we were able to get in the Valley where we were living without a lot of the problems. So obviously there's a massive crime problem that's hit Los Angeles. They're cutting the police. There's been a fairly severe uptick in anti-Semitism in sort of the general area in Los Angeles during the riots. There were targetings of shuls, for example. The taxes in Los Angeles are incredibly burdensome. So you're paying a lot and you're getting very little in terms of social services, both on the state and on the local level. There's a massive homeless problem that has resulted in serious quality of life issues. Your ability to have your kids walk around the streets safely has really been impeded in a major way. It's very, very difficult to do business there. So then it became an issue of, okay, we want to leave. Where do we want to go? And if you're looking for Jewish communities that have an infrastructure in areas that are more politically akin to where I am, and a tax structure that makes things a lot easier financially, you're now limited to about 2 states, right? You can't Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, all of that's off limits. Chicago is essentially off limits. If you want someplace with decent weather, and we're from LA, right? I mean, we don't want to be in the middle of winter all the time. Then Ohio is off limits, and so now basically you're down to Texas and Florida. And they're smaller communities, obviously. Our company is moving to Nashville. I'm going to be spending a lot of time there, flying back and forth. But the Nashville community is still pretty small. I have 3 kids under the age of 7. I want them to have a lot of resources available, different Jewish schools. I want them to, be able to as they get older, date in a large pool. And so it was a really simple choice. It was kind of hilarious because my wife was kind of humoring me. She said, okay, well, we'll go visit and we'll check out South Florida. We had a vacation scheduled for Hawaii for July. Then obviously, thanks to COVID, that got canceled. And so I said, okay, well, I've been wanting to check out South Florida anyway, so let's get on a plane and check it out. And so she said, all right. So we get on the plane and she's figuring that this is just going to be, her giving me my due, and then we all forget about it. And instead, we come here and within 3 weeks, we bought a house. We're getting ready to move. She thought at the beginning we were going to wait a year and that we were going to start a transition, and then it became clear that there's no reason to kind of live in between. And so we traveled to South Florida in June. We bought a house in like the first week of July, and we moved in early October. So it was very, very quick.
It is great to have you. And Ben, I'll tell you, you will find it very refreshing to live in a place where your vote counts and it matters and it makes a difference. And if we can figure out the hanging chads, we actually determine presidential elections, which is really refreshing and really nice. So Ben, earlier today, I tweeted that you're probably the most recognized observant Jew in the world, although Jared Kushner and Ivanka might disagree. But I think it's probably safe to say you're the most famous person in the world who wears a yarmulke on a regular basis. Charles Barkley once famously said that he never signed up to be a role model. And I don't know whether you did either. As you were making this climb and this rise, and what you've done at a young age is extraordinary. Not only all the books that you've published, the media company that you've built, the followers that you have, 3.2 million followers on Twitter, over 7 million followers on Facebook, millions of people who consume your video, your information, you're influencing. And I'm kind of curious, did you ever consider taking that yarmulke off? Were you ever worried the responsibility that when you wear a kippah, when you wear a yarmulke, you're not just representing your views, but you now have this very public face, maybe the most famous public face on earth of someone with a yarmulke? And did you ever consider taking it off as you made that climb up? Do you think you were ever held back, or did it ever hurt you that wore the yarmulke? Were there ever times that you regretted you were wearing a yarmulke during a speaking engagement or an encounter that you had wished maybe you weren't?
No, it never occurred to me. I mean, honestly, it never occurred to me not to wear a yarmulke because I've been wearing a yarmulke consistently since I was 10. So there was no point where it was like, okay, now I'm going to make a decision. Do I wear a yarmulke? Do I not wear a yarmulke? It was on my head. It's what I believe. There's no reason for me to take it off. As far as, being, the most famous Orthodox Jew in the world, first of all, pretty small pool. They're not that. There are many more famous Jews inside the Orthodox community than I am. Outside the Orthodox community, it's not like there are tons of people who fit that bill. Mainly because most of the people who are famous inside the Orthodox community are famous for being Orthodox inside the Orthodox community, namely people who we all consider role models, right? Rabbanim and spiritual leaders and people who create massive movements. I'm mostly famous for things that have very little to do directly with my religion, although obviously I think my religion shapes my values, which I think gives me a little bit more leeway to say, okay, there's a fair bit of diversity inside the Jewish community politically. Obviously, I think not quite as much diversity inside the Orthodox community, because I think there's an actual doctrine that you have to sort of that you have to abide by that does have some political ramifications. But as far as whether it ever held me back, I never really felt like it did. This is an extremely philo-Semitic country. I think in the same way that they're anti-Semites, but this is an incredibly philo-Semitic country. I think this is an incredibly tolerant country for people of all shapes and all sizes and all different orientations. And I think anybody who fails to recognize that truly is being rather ungrateful toward a system that has created so much prosperity and freedom for so many. It doesn't mean that people don't experience incredible hardship and incredible difficulty at the hands of other people, but I cannot say as an Orthodox Jew that the system is designed to harm me in any way, or that the system is discriminating against me in any way, unless I see actual evidence that that's the case. So I've experienced a fair bit of personal anti-Semitism. I was the #1 targeted Jew in the world in 2016 online, according to the ADL. But I don't attribute that to my country, and I don't attribute that to Western civilization more broadly. I attribute that to people who are jerks, and there are plenty of them.
Right, unfortunately, and you've taken the heat for a lot of that. But I think it really is extraordinary that used to the segment that you used to have on your show, where you talked about the weekly parsha, the fact that you're not afraid to reference the Jewish holidays you're observing and why you might be off the air or not in tune necessarily with what's going on the days that you're missing, referencing the Daf Yomi, referencing your moral values that are shaped by Torah, really does spread that light. And whether the people who agree or disagree with you, the haters and the lovers, I think can all agree that it's beautiful that we live in a world where you're able to represent that and share that. And be able to express that. And that's something which I think is very special. And I wonder whether you draw a line between your Jewish values and some of the other political positions. Are all your positions drawn from Torah values? Do you differentiate or divide between the two? Are there lines that you won't cross because of your Judaism or your Jewish values? Do you have, one of the questions people encourage us to ask, do you have particular rabbis or those you consult with if you feel you're pushing the edge, or you want to make sure that what you're thinking conforms with your Torah values?
So first of all, I don't think that my specific Torah values are something to be crammed down on other people via force of government. I'm not a theocrat. And so my values are shaped by Judaism in the same way that I think that most Western values are shaped, in essence, by revelation at Sinai. I mean, I wrote an entire book on how Western values have been shaped, not just Jewish values, Western values have been shaped by Sinai in combination with respect for human reason that largely springs from Athens. The kind of sort of balance between Jerusalem and Athens that was first attributed to Tertullian, that's been used as a framework to sort of understand Western civilization for millennia at this point. And I think that it's a good framework for understanding these sorts of things. I think it also falls squarely within my Maimonidean framework as well as a Thomistic framework, which is the basic notion that if you are looking at the world around you and you're using science and you're using reason to interpret the world around you, and then it conflicts with Torah, then you're doing one of the two things wrong. And so the kind of notion that Torah the Bible is in conflict with general principles of reason or science, if you believe that the hand of God is evident in both, then obviously the problem is with you, right? Either you're interpreting science wrong and you're interpreting natural law wrong, or you're interpreting the Bible wrong. And so it's your job to sort of rectify those breaches. I think that in Mor Nevuchim, in Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides is quite clear about this, and obviously Aquinas is writing very much the same thing for the Christian world at the same time. So that's something that I really do hold by. As far as how that shapes my political values, again, I can think that something is deeply immoral without thinking that it necessarily has to be illegal. This is why I think one of the things I think that religion is good for is not ruling from above. I tend to agree with Shmuel when he is very critical of monarchy. And the basis of religion to me is sort of more bottom up than top down. And And biblically speaking, it tends to be more bottom up than top down. And that's why the Jews are critiqued as a people, not just their leadership is critiqued when something goes wrong. They're critiqued as a people by the prophets repeatedly, because what religion is meant to do is create the social bonds between us and to create standards that we all live by. It's not necessarily, particularly in a system that's as diverse as ours in the United States, and that has lent so much room for people to practice their religion. There's a vast difference between the creation of social capital and the cram downs of government. I don't agree with the 2012 DNC slogan that government is the only thing we all share. In fact, I think it's the least of the things we ought to share.
Interesting. And do you have, are there people you speak to directly, or mentors, rabbis, guides, who, when you're trying to reconcile, I know you study Daf Yomi, you're obviously on the path of learning and growing, as we all are, when you think that things are above you in terms of reconciling it with Judaism, are there people that you will consult in order to make sure, as you've grown and take on this more public stage and in a certain way represent the Jewish people, that will give you some healthy pushback?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I've studied with a variety of Rabbanim over the years, and mostly because I want to know that what I'm saying about Judaism particularly is accurate. I feel like, Judaism is not my area of expertise. It's something I live in, but I'm not a Rav. And so when people ask me about halakha, I will openly and obviously say I'm not a Rav. I don't paskin halakha. I'm not qualified to paskin halakha. If you want to talk to somebody who's qualified to paskin halakha, there are 3 people on this particular call who are all better qualified than I am to paskin halakha. So, you should ask one of them. If you're asking me sort of like the general framework on where Judaism lands on particular issues, then I can give you sort of a general framework. And then obviously there's a lot of play in the joints. And the more expert you are, it seems very often the more play in the joints there is and the more complicating factors there are. So I'm not somebody who is qualified to rule in any individual case or any general case. All I can do is sort of give the general philosophical framework for how Judaism approaches issues. And there I do try to look into the sources and determine how Judaism speaks. Now, as I say, there are times when I think the public policy is not to be shaped by specific halakha. So I'll take an easy example. So I'm extremely pro-life, right? I've gotten pushback from obviously not Orthodox Jews, but also some Orthodox Jews on the basis that Judaism provides for dispensations in a lot of early term abortions. Right. There is the possibility, according to certain, there's a wide variety of opinion on this, ranging from Moshe Feinstein, who's quite strict on it, to Rav Soloveitchik, who's also quite strict on it, to other Rabbanim who are looser about when they're willing to grant dispensation for early term abortion. And the general idea is that, well, if you're so pro-life and you want to ban abortion except under certain circumstances, isn't that conflicting with the ability of a Rav to do a particular thing? Well, again, my read of natural law might fall in conflict with how I would rule if I thought that this were to be a Jewish state in terms of a halachic state. But I don't think it's America's job to be a halachic state. I think it's America's job to fulfill basic dictates of morality and to provide the license for all of us to do so individually through exercise of individual freedom.
Amazing. Rabbi Moskowitz.
Wow. First of all, Ben, thank you so much for being on. It's nice to meet you. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about relationships. Obviously, as a very public figure, relationships are probably a little complicated for you. And I guess there are 2 parts to my question. Number one, when you meet people, which one do you prefer? I guess which one aggravates you more? Does it aggravate you when someone disagrees with you and battles with you and argues with you? Or does it aggravate you when people agree with you, worship you, and try to do everything to make you think that they're on your side? So kind of like, how do you approach relationships in that regard? And I guess there's a second part to that, which is, how do you have relationships, right? How do you have friendships when you're such a public person and people want to get close to public figures? And certainly you're moving into a new area, and I'm sure you've had this in LA as well. How do you gauge what's a real relationship? What's someone that shares your values that you want to have that type of relationship for? And when do you say, you know what, you're just looking for someone that you worship, someone who has a lot of followers on Facebook. I don't really want that type of relationship with you.
So it was a little bit difficult to hear because it's breaking up just a little bit. My connection isn't fantastic. But if I got your first question correctly, you were basically asking if in a relationship I'm looking for somebody who disagrees or somebody who agrees, or how much that makes a difference. Is that correct? Is that what the question was? The first one?
Pretty much, yeah. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So my forgive me, the connection stinks. But The basic answer to that one is, if I think that somebody is interested in the best for me, just like, you'd consider any family or friend, then it doesn't matter to me whether they agree with me or disagree with me on a particular issue. I want people who can tell me when they think that I'm doing something wrong and make me better. I hope that I've been trying to do that on a day-by-day basis. There are many cases in the past several years where friends have come to me and they said, 3-4 years ago on Twitter, you said something really nasty about something, and you really might want to rethink that. And I've actually gone out of my way in many cases to publicly recant or to specifically call the person and apologize for it. I hope that I always have room in my life for friends who are able to do that and not just sycophants. So that's an important thing. Look, I'm lucky enough that I met my wife before any of this happened. Right, I was 24 and she was 20, and we've been married for 13 years almost. And so, I don't have a lot of doubts on the score that she is willing to tell me where to head in when I'm incorrect about something. So that's helpful. I tend to be more of a family person than a friends person by nature. I have usually a couple of close friends, and that's about it. And a lot of my friends are people who I've known really since childhood. And so that, tends to alleviate some of the risk of people who just want to get close because of prominence or because it's fun to say that they're friends with somebody who has some notoriety. But honestly, I think that most people don't want that. And the way that you can tell, is really by how much people ask you for things, frankly. If people are constantly asking you to do things for them, then, just like anything else, you're now a service provider as opposed to a friend.
Right.
Does that mean does that mean that we can't be friends?
There's a certain number of people in my life who get to ask me to do something, but they're all blood relations.
Does that mean after asking you to come on behind the Bima, we're not going to be friends now?
I think it's all over. It's all over.
Well, let me ask a follow-up, which is...
Yeah, exactly. You shattered the vessel. It's all done. Yeah.
Take our listeners, what's it like for you when you go to shul? You go to shul on a Shabbos. Obviously, you're very public about your opinions throughout the week. Do you prefer people smile and nod at you when they see you? Do you prefer people coming over saying hello, trying to connect to you? Do you want to, when you're in shul on Shabbos, that you're kind of in your sanctuary and you don't want to be bothered by that stuff? Or do you go to shul like so many other people for a little bit of the hak, for a little bit of the conversation, and you're curious how what you said during the week plays out amongst the people that you're sitting around in shul?
Yeah, so I mean, some of that is obviously fun. So I've gone to shul with my dad since I was a kid. My parents also moved into the area, and my dad and I have sat next to each other at shul since I was, since before I was bar mitzvah. My dad is an extremely social person. I am far less social than my dad is, just as a human being, because my dad is my dad is the kind of person where you get in an elevator with him, and by the end of the elevator ride, he knows your entire life story. He's your best friend. And so my dad really does get, want to interact with people in that way. During davening, I don't like talking at all. During davening, it's my relaxation time, actually. So I'm either davening or I'm reading, which are my ways of both connecting and disconnecting, depending on, what I'm doing at the time. As far as after shul, I'm happy to talk about, anything and everything with people, so long as they're always, unfortunately, without naming any names, of course, there are people who sometimes monopolize your time. There are always people. There's always a couple people who kind of buttonhole you, and most people don't do that. Most people are respectful of your time. They just want to, they have a quick question, they want to get it answered. I don't have any problem being part of a conversation with one person or many people. But what is always uncomfortable is having to tell somebody when people can't pick up social cues. When it's like, okay, well, I need to move away now and go check on my kids. That is a cue for, okay, this conversation needs to cease for a moment. And so, sometimes there are people who can't pick up on the social cues. It's not their fault. I mean, if I were, there are people I'm sure I would do that to too. I'm frankly bewildered that people want to do that for me. And I find it flattering that people want to hear my opinion on things. I mean, that's a nice thing. It could be worse. People could definitely not want to hear my opinion on things, I suppose.
Your father's brilliant and a great conversationalist, and I could talk to him forever. I want to ask you, you have an extraordinary section of your website, something very unusual among media personalities, certainly unusual, maybe unheard of among politicians, which is the section on your website where you reference the things that you regret saying or writing, and and how you would do it differently. And my question is the following: your style online sometimes some might interpret it as being a little bit of an agitator. There's an edge. There's a confidence, maybe even an aggressiveness to the positions that you take, and it's been successful. You've influenced countless, and you've built an empire doing it. And I've come to know you a little bit offline to see the softer side. People don't know the kind of extraordinary chesed that you do, that you've used your fame and celebrity to really positively help people, and the kind of generosity that you and your wife have shown with your resources. They don't necessarily know that other side of you. So it's a two-part question. Number one is, what are the parts of Ben Shapiro that you wish people knew about you, the offline, not the tweets and not the daily podcast and not the policy positions? What are the softer sides of you that you wish people knew? And my other question is, that part of your website, which again, I think is really extraordinary and a reflection of your deep Jewish values, where you are willing to reference the things that you regret. Are there things that you don't regret what you've said, but you regret the way you said it? Meaning you believe in the policy and you believe what you said, but you think maybe it could have been said in a way which might have been more sensitive or had less hurt to people that you unintended to hurt.
For sure. I mean, of course. And in fact, one section of that article, I believe, is about things that I say are true, but I wish that I said in a slightly different way. So there's stuff that I've said that outright is just stupid, and that I think is idiotic and wish I had never said it. Most of it happened between the time I was about 18 and the time I was about 23. And then there's things that I've said where I agree with me. I just said it in an uncomfortable way. And sometimes I look back at old tweets and I'm like, yeah, that was, put not particularly well. Like the factual underlying basis of it is correct, but yeah, I could have said that better. I could have said that nicer. And of course, I mean, I literally get paid to say things. I say, I write, it used to be that I would write literally hundreds of thousands of words every single year. I have hundreds of thousands of tweets. I have written at this point 10 books. I've ghostwritten another 9. There was a point where I was writing 4 articles a day. There was a point when I was working for Breitbart in the early years, I was writing 10 to 12 articles a day. So I've written a lot. Wow. So I'm sure that there's plenty of stuff in there where, millions of words we're talking about. I'm sure there's many of them that are misplaced, many of them that I was writing in the heat of passion and wish later that I hadn't written in the heat of passion. One of the things that I hope I get better at is speaking with passion, but without anger. And that's a hard one, right? I mean, that is a difficult one because if you're passionate about something and something deeply wrong is going on, it's hard not to speak abrasively. And frankly, there's sometimes, particularly with ideas, where I think it's important to speak abrasively because it shocks people into awareness that something bad is going on or something that's worth noting is going on. I try to restrict it to ideas as opposed to human beings. I think there are certain human beings who I think deserve the critique as human beings, but I think that that's pretty rare. And if I'm making a joke, I also don't think that a joke is the same thing as me kind of doing typical mockery of every single politician. I mean, I do impressions of everybody from Bernie to Trump. I don't put that in the same category as thinking down a rotten human being who deserves no. So there's that. The public persona, I guard my private life pretty zealously, so I try to hold by. I'm a big Rambam fan, and I try to hold by the edict that.
Whoa. Anybody else enjoying the fact that one of the biggest media moguls in the world is having bad Wi-Fi? We feeling a little better about things, or are we not picking up social cues that the interview's over?
It's not just us. I know he's just called his wife out and said, "Get me out of here." Pull the plug.
Possible we're not.
I felt like we're on like Fox or CNN, where there's always that delay between the question and the answer, like when they're overseas, and there's always a little. Yeah.
We're getting right into the heart of it. I want to hear about the public persona and the private persona.
I know.
We're right there. Come back,
someone
Ben.
just texted, welcome to Xfinity in South Florida.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got the same service as you do, Rabbi
Purgatory.
Right.
Otherwise known as purgatory. Yeah. Is that
going to end? They don't have these problems.
Well, let's until he gets back on. Rabbi Goldberg, do you have that? You write a lot. You speak a lot. You obviously not as in a very different way than he does. There we go.
Ben, we're just saying, by the way, it's really validating to us to know that one of the media moguls of the world is having Wi-Fi problems.
It's not. You know what? I feel bad doing this, but this is what happens when I run let the router. Yeah, I'm gonna get closer to the router. I will be right back.
No problem. No problem. Hold on, I'll take him off. I'll let him back on in a moment. when we have them.
Does this happen
I
on
love
his
it.
show also?
This is like if you're like a hacker golfer and you ever see a professional golfer who like duffs the ball in the water and you feel bad for them,
feel
but on the
so-
other hand,
You feel
you're
so
like,
good.
yes,
Validated.
they're human. That is amazing. We love for them to be human. Let's see. Are we there yet? We're almost there. We're almost there.
People are pasting on Facebook that if we need an extra guest, they're available.
Oh, yeah, Marco is available. Bring him on board. No?
I've been waiting.
Yeah. Oops.
They would love it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, hold on. And
Stand by the guest.
There we
Alrighty,
go.
is this better reception? I have now moved rooms.
Yes.
Much better.
Much better. And we again, Ben, we can't reiterate how we thought maybe we weren't picking up on the social cues and we were done with the interview. Maybe that was the problem. But thank you so much for being back. So we're talking about the online persona, the private persona, what you wish people knew about the heart and soul of Ben Shapiro that maybe doesn't come across in the tweets.
I mean, look, I think I'm a good husband. I think I'm a good dad. I try to be nice to people, but people are going to gather about me what they want to gather about me. I think, honestly, a lot of that does come out from the show. Like, if you listen to the show on a regular basis, I think a lot of this sort of stuff comes out. I make jokes about my wife and my kids all the time. I talk about, what we do on a daily basis. I think most of the impressions of me publicly come from, the way our social media works, which is these little tiny little snippets, right? Tweets or memes or 30 seconds clips from my show as opposed to the hour-long show. I know that's the complaint of everybody who's in media, is that you should actually listen to the whole show, but actually it's kind of true. You should actually look beyond the headline and listen to the whole show. As far as, some of the nice things that I do, it's not up to me to talk about that sort of stuff because frankly, it's self-serving. And so, when we give tzedakah, I try to give tzedakah fairly anonymously. When we do nice things for people, I try to keep it on the down low, unless it's a very public campaign in which many people are involved, because otherwise, again, it's about burnishing my image as opposed to anything else. If that helped get across a point, which is that I think that a religious worldview makes you a better person, which I think it absolutely can, or if it was about the idea that acting morally in your personal life is sometimes indicative of or can be sometimes indicative of political leaning, then that'd be one thing, and I will talk about that sort of stuff. But if it's just a self-serving, look at me, look at all the nice things I do kind of thing, I'm uncomfortable with that. I think other people should be uncomfortable with that as well.
It's and that's exactly right for you to not be sharing it. And I'm not saying it's my or our responsibility to share, but I think it's a really important reminder that the people that we see in their online persona or the caricature of who they are is not the totality of who they are. And even when there are points, not with you in particular, but with others that we disagree with, we should remember that there's a total picture. They're a mother, a father, a husband, a wife, a friend, a neighbor, and there's probably a lot more we agree with than we disagree with. And if we knew the softer side or some of the good things they did, then maybe we'd feel different about them. So that's why I think it's important for the world to know that about you or other public personalities.
One of the things that I think is definitely true, and this I have tried to get across publicly, is that there's this image of, there's kind of two weird images that don't really drop. One is, rabid right-wing reactionary who's always destroying people online and all that. And the other is the fact that I have conversations with people I disagree with literally all the time, more than any other person I know who's not, pretending to be an objective media. You don't see a lot of people who are on the hard left having conversations with people who are on the hard right. I've had conversations publicly, and I invite them on my show, and I treat them with great, I think, conciliatory tenor. I've had on people from Vox.com, I've had on Ezra Klein, I've had on Matt Iglesias, I've had on Larry Wilmore from Comedy Central, with whom I disagree about nearly everything. I've had on Jason Blum, the Hollywood producer, who is a far leftist. I've had on people who are advocates for vegetarianism. And they're interesting conversations. I spent my entire life being around people with whom I disagree. And so I actually enjoy those conversations. And that doesn't really mesh with the other image of me, which is somebody who's, a blowtorch. And both images exist. Because everybody, it's the old, blind men feeling an elephant kind of thing. If all you get is just the snippet of one guy feeling the elephant's leg, not quite the same thing as recognizing that an entire elephant exists. So I don't expect that everybody's going to make themselves familiar with the corpus of my work. That's not really their job. But it's before you make a fulsome judgment about somebody, you should at least take the time to just look at their YouTube channel for 5 seconds.
Right. Get to know them a little bit. Rabbi Broide.
Yeah. First of all, Ben, big fan, longtime listener. It's so great to see you in person right now. So this is fantastic. Just got a question. You rose very quickly to stardom. with between almost 20 books, between the shows and everything else you've been doing. Were there any parts or different points along that journey where you said, maybe I thought I was going to go in a different direction, it just didn't work out? Were there challenges along the way? And also, where do you want to be in 10 years from now? You've already 20 bucks. You've got the show already. What's more? What's left?
Well, like anybody who achieves any level of prominence, it looks like it's sudden, but really it's toiling away in the mines for years, and then it's all of a sudden. So it's all slow, and then fast. And so if you look at sort of the story of my career, I was syndicated at age 17. I'd written a bunch of books before I sort of reached any level of prominence. I would say probably just looking at sort of my career timeline, the first level of true prominence outside of just the conservative movement was probably that Piers Morgan interview in 2013. But by that point, I'd already written several books. I'd already been to Harvard Law School. I'd been doing this for a long time. I mean, I'm 36 now. I've been doing this since I was 17. So I've literally been doing this for more than half my life. And it's really only in the last 7 or 8 years that it's really started to, pick up the way that it has. So I think that every career story is kind of like that. Nobody sees all the stuff in it. Look, nobody wants to hear about the labor. Everybody just wants to see the baby. So that's the that's sort of the story of anybody's career. But as far as other directions, yeah, I mean, when I went to college, I never thought I was going to be in politics. My parents thought I was, but I always thought that apparently from the time I was young, which they've since told me. But when I was a kid, I thought that I was going to be in music. I thought that I was going to be. I was a pretty virtuosic violinist. I was studying with one of the top 10 teachers in the country. And then I had to make a call when I was like 16, 17. Do I want to play violin 8 hours a day? And the answer to that was I wasn't going to do it. And the career prospects in music are not fantastic. And I knew this because my father was a professional pianist. So I thought I was going to double major in music and genetic science when I went to UCLA. I went to UCLA when I was 16. And so I didn't leave home. I lived at home because my parents were like, "Are you insane? You're not living away from home at the age of 16 on a college campus. That's not a thing that's happening." So I lived at home, and I thought that's what I was going to do. And I kind of got roped into politics just by coincidence. I was walking through UCLA. I saw a piece in the UCLA Daily Bruin comparing Ariel Sharon, then the Prime Minister of Israel, to Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi. And I walked into the Daily Bruin editorial board, and I said, "I'd like to write a counter," and that sort of started things off. When I finished law school, I thought I was going to go into real estate law. Even after I decided that I really wasn't, going to do real estate law, that working in a law firm was, as it turns out, a horrifying experience that I simply could not bear. It could have also been timing. I joined a real estate law firm in September of 2007, which, as it turns out, was literally the worst time in the history of the world to join the real estate industry. I figured that this was not for me. I'm not detail oriented enough, frankly, to do pagination checks and doc review, which is what you're forced to do for the first several years. It was miserable for me. It was miserable for the firm. I was amused that when I quit the law firm, I remember sitting in the office of the senior associate, and the senior associate saying to me, "Why are you quitting this firm? You're making so much money here." And I gave all my reasons. This is boring. I don't feel like I'm doing anything really important. It just doesn't fulfill me. And there's a second senior associate who was there, and the second senior associate goes, "Maybe I should quit."
Convinced.
So I tried the real estate thing, and then I thought that I was going to be the behind the scenes guy. I thought that I was going to be the business guy. I'd been doing writing, but I never thought of myself as sort of the in front of the camera talent. And it took me hooking up with my business partner, Jeremy Boring, for him to say to me, "You're getting this all wrong." And it was particularly after the Piers Morgan thing, where he said, "I think that we've got this backwards. Like, yeah, you're good at business and all of that, but I can do business and we can do the business together, but you really need to be the talent because not a lot of people can argue like you. You're a good speaker. You have really, excellent command of the facts. And so we need to put focus on that." And that was really when we made the concerted attempt to change kind of career paths that way. Thank God it caught on. I mean, we started the podcast literally in his pool house. There were, I believe, the first episode was downloaded 3,000 times. And now, our episode right after the vice presidential debate was downloaded and watched in excess of 3 million times. So, and that's an average episode of the show will get 1.5 to 2 million views and downloads. So it's
you're almost up there with Behind the Bima. One day, man. One day.
We are so
One day
close.
you'll be there. Yeah, it's an extraordinary story, but I want to correct one thing. It wasn't the worst time for you to go into law. It was the best time, because had you gone in during any other time, you might still be doing pagination, and you might not have moved on from them. So it's all the hand of Hashem which is directing you. We've kept you a very long time, and you're incredibly generous and gracious with your time. We don't want to wait for that socially awkward moment. But just a lightning round, quick question before we let you go. Could you spend 1 minute just talking about what Daf Yomi and daily Torah learning means? Because I think there's a whole world of listeners who follow you, Jewish, maybe even observant, but don't have that dedication to daily learning. And they should know that, your opinions are informed. They come from Torah and what Torah means to you. So what is doing the daf? Why did you pick it up? What does it mean for you? How important is it to do it daily? The other Torah learning that you do?
And so we got to the end of the daf cycle, and I had not been doing daf yomi. And as there was all this publicity around daf yomi, I figured, why not just jump in? And also, if I talk about it on the show, then presumably there are I have a lot of from listeners, obviously, and people who are not as from, who might want to give it a try and actually get acquainted with Daf Yomi. And so I talked about it on the show, and I know that the Daf Yomi site, that I think that day they had several thousand people who joined up to do Daf Yomi, which is pretty cool. And then that was given sort of another boost when the Vanity Fair did a piece on me, and then behind me was a whole shelf of Sfarim. And so there was all the speculation online about exactly what the various Sfarim meant about my different,
I saw that discussion on Twitter.
That became kind of a thing. What it means to me, and I can't say that honestly I hit every single day with Daf Yomi. I try to keep up with most days still. I got all the way through Brachos. It started to fade a little bit during Shabbos. It's starting to come back now. But it's what's meant to me. First of all, I've missed out on having a skill set. I always like to increase my own skill set. My skill set when it comes to just being able to pick up and read a Gemara is not up to par. And so because I didn't go to yeshiva for a year, I went to ULA in Los Angeles, and then I went directly to college. I never had the experience of breaking my teeth over a daf. So being more familiarized with Aramaic and really like learning how the phraseology works and how the logic works. I mean, it's a complete foreign language, not just because it's Aramaic, but also because the syntax, you literally have to read entire lines of reasoning into a 7 or 8 word phrase sometimes. And that can only come with just sheer immersion. So, I would like to do more than Daf Yomi. I mean, at some point when I take a summer off, I'd like to actually go and do it full time for a while and actually get really familiar with it. But even being immersed in it is for an hour a day or for 45 minutes a day is really useful. And I stumble across chestnuts that I'm able to use and that I'm able to bring to bear. I mean, that's the thing about Gemara that's so weird and interesting, is that they'll be in the middle of a discussion about very specific halachot surrounding exactly how you should do bracha, and then all of a sudden you're in the middle of a conversation about why bad things happen to good people, and there are various takes on it. You're like, okay, well, this is interesting, and sometimes that's useful in broader conversation. I mean, honestly, it was more for a skills thing. When it comes to Parsha study, that's where I tend to get more of the direct meaning. I get a ton out of, my book Right Side of History is very heavily steeped in a lot of Tanakh. And I've written entire screenplays about Avram Avinu. And, I think Tanakh I think virtually every important message that has ever been conveyed in human history can be boiled down to many of the stories in Tanakh and even more specifically in what we're about to read in upcoming weeks. I think that I'm probably going to go back to, I took a couple years off because the only problem with doing the Torah cycle every year on the show, doing the Parsha every single week, is that then I have to come up with a different Var Torah. So the good news is that it's been a couple.
Welcome to the rabbin.
Exactly. So now it's been a couple of years, so I can just use all my old material and assume that most of the audience has never heard it. So I was planning actually on starting to do that again this week since we're back to the beginning. So that'll be interesting. And then I study Mishnayos with somebody for about 10 minutes a day. And the nice thing there is that the language is easy enough that I can do that while I'm in the car, and the person can kind of talk me through it. I don't have to have the text in front of me. But listen, I think it's important to re-engage, and I feel bad when there are periods of time during my life when I haven't engaged as much. And obviously, this all comes with the humility of knowing that this is one of the things that's just generally amusing, is that while I may be one of the more prominent Orthodox Jews on planet Earth, I'm also in the bottom third of Orthodox Jews, probably in terms of knowing things. And so that is it's good. It gives me room to grow.
As long as you're learning, you're heading in the right direction. I want to thank you for the time you spent with us, well beyond what we talked about. You've been generous with your time, and I want to leave you with a bracha. We had a great rabbi, Rav Usher Weiss, the Minchas Usher, spoke in our shul, and he talked about the mission of a Jew is to find the balance and the blend between passion and compassion. And you were talking earlier about the importance of communicating with passion. And so the bracha I want to give you is that with your yarmulke on and representing Torah and Judaism, that Hashem should help you continue to find your voice, to communicate passion with compassion, and to be able to influence and shape things in a positive way, a positive direction for us here in America, for Israel, and around the world. Thank you for your time. Welcome to South Florida. Mazel tov on being eligible to vote in your first election that matters. And we'll look forward to, please God, continuing this conversation. Although I want to make it very clear, there's no pressure on you to reciprocate and have us back on your podcast. Quite all right. Don't feel that way at all. But thank you so much, and welcome to South Florida. And we're here for anything you need.
It's great to have you.
I appreciate it. I'm into the bracha, and good luck with that one, God. We'll see how it goes.
Thank you so much. Have a great night. Thank you.
Have a great night.
Wow.
Okay.
First of all, you did it. You weren't nervous for this one. That was great.
That was a lot of
you
fun.
did it.
That was great. That was a lot of fun.
Great job.
It's what I found in all my conversations, that I've had yet with him, which is not many. I don't want to pretend like we're best friends offline. And apparently, for asking him to do this, I might have just ruined any chance of a friendship. But he's a regular guy. Sometimes we see somebody's name in lights, or we see how big they are, and we've had big speakers, big rabbanim, prominent people, political. And we now have 2 campaigns who have been speaking to us about hosting events. And there's the public persona. And then you sit in the office before or after the speech and you schmooze and you realize people are regular people. And people all have their own insecurities, and people all have their own, even at the end when he admitted in terms of his knowledge base that he has to fill in about Judaism.
I thought that was amazing. And for any of our listeners, I hope it inspires them greatly. Here's a person who's achieved such fame and notoriety, prominence, and he's still hungry. He's looking to grow. He's looking to challenge himself. To me, that's amazingly inspiring. And I hope a lot of people took that lesson from what he said at the end.
Yeah, I hope they do. And I hope people take up daily learning. And hopefully in future podcasts, we could have 3 people who can paskin halacha, not just 2.
I'll tell you what else I thought was amazing was when he described how he was at UCLA and he wasn't planning to go into politics. And he sees an article that he disagrees with, and he walks into the office and he says, "Can I write an editorial?" And that takes a lot of confidence, even for someone as intelligent and well-spoken, articulate as he is. It takes a lot of confidence to be willing to put yourself out there and to speak your voice. And we need more Jews like that. We need more Jews. Again, whichever side you're on, whichever perspectives you subscribe to, but we need more Jews that when they see something that bothers them in a newspaper, on college campuses, that they feel confident and comfortable stepping in and writing something and to disagree and to represent the views that they hold by.
Or put more simply, he found his voice. He didn't know he had
found his voice.
He thought his expression was on the violin. We have that in common. Definitely was never playing 8 hours a day. Probably never played 8 minutes a day. He thought his voice was on the violin, and then he found his voice. And all of us can find our voice. You don't have to skip 2 grades or be in college at 16 to find your passion. And there's no shortage of things to be passionate about and advocate for in whatever direction, with respect, passion, with compassion. And I thought that was impressive too.
I think people love his honesty also. No, people I keep reading. First of all, we've never had so many comments flowing through the screen during a show.
They're dropping off precipitously right now after he got up.
No, but we've got a brand new audience. By the way, every week for our audience, Behind the Bima, it's usually Wednesday nights, 9 p.m. And, it's growing. It's growing. He's at 3 million. We're at like 2.8.
Right.
It's growing.
But people love his honesty. And you might disagree with him. It doesn't mean you don't want to tune in because you just want to get an honest opinion. Today, people aren't honest. They're not telling you what's the truth. So it's just nice. It's refreshing.
There are people who their public persona is humble, kind, and sweet. And when they're asked to do favors or to give their resources, they are absolutely obnoxious jerks. And there are people who their public persona might include something that seems as an agitator or aggressive, but offline, they're ready to step up, help, do things. They have a real chesed personality.
You and I talk about that all the time when speakers come to BRS. We talk about speakers that are a little bit prima donnas. We talk about speakers that you just want to sit in the backyard, and schmooze with, and are so generous with their time and with their wisdom and with their guidance. I mean, I still think that the greatest moment, I think, with a speaker since I've been here was when Brett Stevens was in your office. And he looks up and he says, yeah, I was once related to a rabbi, Grzinski. And you're like, you mean that picture over here of Chaim Ozer, one of the greatest rabbis? And he was so enamored by that. And here I'm like, here's a guy. At the time, I think he just switched over to the New York Times. I said, here's a guy who has a voice, a mouthpiece to millions of people. And he's sitting here schmoozing in our office about a great rabbi from Lithuania named Chaim Ozer Grzinski.
Not only that, he was talking about his kids. We were talking about family.
Yeah, it was such a great conversation. Such a great conversation.
Which to follow up on that, I want to say with great pride that we spoke to him for what, 40 minutes, a little under 40 minutes. We even had the Wi-Fi working for part of it. And I wanted to say that people challenged us. We said this was not going to be politics. He brought up abortion, but we're not going to go to who he thinks is going to win for president or what are the liabilities or assets of either of the candidates or what's his position on a political issue. And people challenged us. There's no way you're having Ben Shapiro on and you're not talking politics. That's who he is. Kulo politics. And I hope this was an example. It was an effort, but it wasn't hard. That you can talk to someone about the things that you have in common. Talk about what daily Torah learning means to you. Talk about your journey to where you got where you are. Talk about how you forge relationships and what they matter. Talk
failures,
about
challenges.
Failures,
and you weren't done. You have another hour of questions that you could have kept going.
Yeah, I have another hour.
That was part one. Like, we forgot to tell him that. That was part one.
Who wants to hear the questions we didn't get to? Anyone want to hear the questions?
No, you got to save them.
I want to thank our listeners. Our listeners submitted questions the last few days, a ton of questions. And I wanted to ask him a lightning round, which included what is the most accurate or the best news source to read other than his? If he had to suggest another news source, which is objective, but that would teeter on politics. I stayed away from that. What's his favorite sefer? What rabbi or teacher had the biggest impact on his life?
I was curious if he could go back to any point in Jewish history, what would it be? If he could go back and relive any point in Jewish history, what would it be?
The Ushpizin question.
No, because I actually saw that the other day and I was curious about it.
Wondering how his teachers dealt with him in high school. I mean, this is a guy that seems to know everything. Like, imagine if you're in ninth grade and you know way more than your professor. I mean, it must have been hard.
You can call my teachers, ask them how they dealt with me.
Yeah, exactly.
I had another question one of our listeners submitted that we didn't get to, which was, if you follow him on social media, you'll see, and I don't know, and I wouldn't have asked him this online, whether he is actually writing every tweet or there's a team, but he's engaged in consuming as well as producing information all day long, 6 days a week. And the question is, how does he disconnect? 4
letters a day. He said shul. That was, I thought, great. He said, I come to shul, and when I daven, that's my way of disconnecting. Right.
By the way,
it should be like that for all of our members.
I love how he said, I've written 10 books, and already that's amazing. He's like, yeah, and I wrote another 9.
Could he ghostwrite one for me?
I'll tell you but you spoke about kind of our agenda with that interview. I think one of the other things is what's made our show as successful as it is people don't oftentimes get to see the other side of people, right? People see that the Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, who teaches classes and gives Shabbos Shuvah drushes that 4,000 people listen to and sitting up at the pulpit. No, but people see that public side of you, but they don't oftentimes see the schmoozy side of you, the side of you where you're talking about your family and what it's like to plan a wedding during COVID. And, I think people gravitate to normalcy. And I think they appreciate when they see that even people that they admire and public figures can also be normal. And, I found it great when he was talking about his wife and his children. I think that's phenomenal.
Right. I that's behind the Bima. The whole theme of behind the Bima is getting to see the real people. Take off the mask, take off the persona, take off the inhibition, and see the real person and have real conversation. And we're going to continue to have those kinds of guests. And I think we've succeeded until now, mixing up NFL owners with great prominent rabbis, with a media celebrity, and being able to really mix it up with the CEO of a public company. And you should see, we're just getting started, who we have to come. I regret that we're almost out of time. We got a couple minutes left, and there were so many other things we wanted to talk about. I also wanted to ask him, by the way, whether he always was those political positions or did he move? Who's the famous quote that if you weren't liberal when you were young, you didn't have a heart. If you weren't conservative, you didn't have a brain. I'm not saying that that's correct. I'm not endorsing that as accurate, but I'm curious whether he shifted or moved. Who's the biggest influence? His parents, rabbis, things he read, what was it that did it? But other topics that we had to talk about, which we're going to have to get to next week, include the minhag at BRS for Kol Na'arim and the sad reality and fact of how many people we're still davening for, and the gift of healthy children, which no one should take for granted, and the importance of continuing to daven and act with sensitivity. We'll come back to that in a future week, talk more about our Simchas Torah and why some thought that Simchas Torah Corona was better than any
Best
other
ever.
we ever had. Some
Best
thought, not even saying that we did, some thought it was the best ever. Why did they think that? You may notice that we didn't make a l'chaim tonight. Why didn't we make a l'chaim? We're done making l'chaims. We are all using, thank you, Donnie Oppenheimer Law Group, again for your sponsorship. And we are drinking out of our swag over here, but it's water in mine. Why did we stop having the l'chaims? Important conversation of what motivated that. And maybe we'll end on this note because we always give the latest on fighting anti-Semitism and advocating for Israel. Facebook's policy this week. Excellent. Well done, Facebook. Some might say it's about time. And where have you been? You don't even get a yashikoach. But I want to say yashikoach. What should be a given is not always a given. The fact that they said they will not tolerate Holocaust deniers. And if you think that that should be a given, then know that Spanish River has reinstated a principal who is unwilling to go on record and say unequivocally the Holocaust happened. Living in a district with Holocaust survivors, we talked about this last week, and we should hold accountable. There's an election coming up. We will share with our listeners, at least for those who live in our district and can vote, who were the individuals who voted to reinstate, because we should vote to not reinstate them. Anyone could reinstate somebody who denies the Holocaust. That is a hate crime. That is an anti-Semitic crime. That is deeply personal and deeply painful to all of us, particularly to our survivors. And it's intolerable, which makes Facebook's policy all the more important. And we should express our gratitude and our thanks to Facebook. So on behalf of Rabbi Moskowitz and Rabbi Broide and our staff behind the Bima,
Donnie Oppenheimer.
Those three names overlap with our staff. That's it right there. Thank you, Donnie, for sponsoring again. We have a bunch of sponsors lined up, but we have room for sponsorships. If you'd like to sponsor a future episode of Behind the Bima, please be in touch with Lee, Lee, at brsonline.org. Huge thanks to Ben Shapiro. Love him or hate him, agree with him or disagree with him. You have to be impressed with him, of what he's built and what he's grown, and worth getting to know the whole person, not just part of him. Listen, next week, back to Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. We got a great show lined up for next week. Until then, stay happy, stay